The death penalty is a just punishment for the unjustified taking of innocent human life under specific circumstances, which play out as the most grievous or heinous of circumstances when compared to other first-degree murders.
I don't think it serves any rational purpose any longer, if it ever did, that there are too many chances for error.
The death penalty is wrong. It's destructive. It's destructive to people and societies and cultures, and the whole witness of the faith community as well as the medical community says you must not do this.
Only 23 countries executed people in 2016, including the U.S. The death penalty is banned in 19 states in the U.S. Only 14 states imposed the death sentence in 2016. 10 counties in the U.S. imposed the majority of death sentences. 20 people were executed in 2016 in the U.S. That's a 25-year low. More than 150 people sent to death row were exonerated. There are 120 prisoners on Arizona's death row. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled that juveniles and persons with intellectual disabilities do not possess the requisite moral culpability and therefore cannot be executed. Yet defendants with diminished culpability, similar to categorically exempted defendants, fall through the cracks of justice. Borderline intellectual functioning, IQs in the 70s and low 80s, youth, ages 18 to 21 years, people with extreme childhood trauma, including physical or sexual abuse, those with fetal alcohol syndrome, and people with substance abuse disorders.
It was clear to me that death penalty was not the right answer, and I don't think it is the right answer, period. When we have someone who's killed somebody, why is it okay for us to kill somebody because they killed somebody? It doesn't make sense morally, ethically, any way you want to cut it.
The incredible distortion of Scripture and faith when people quote small passages from the Torah or from Hebrew Scriptures, like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, is just bad Bible.
One argument that's given against the death penalty very frequently is, why would we kill someone to show that killing people is wrong? And I think that's oversimplified in that there's a difference between killing someone out of anger or killing someone out of greed as an individual and the societal institution of the death penalty that's engaged in many other kinds of commitments. There are many other kinds of reasons. That said, I think everyone believes that killing a human being is a bad thing and it needs some really strong justification. So what sort of justification can we give for it? The two most common kinds of justification are justice and retribution and deterrence. The justice and retribution view is that if someone does something wrong, they deserve to be punished for it. Just as if someone does something right, they deserve to be praised for it. And that justice means giving people what they deserve. And I think the idea is if someone does something wrong, in a sense, something in the universe has been bent out of whack, and we need to bend it back into shape.
It is a morally defensible position to pursue the death penalty against those defendants who have committed a heinous offense and who fall within one of those 14 factors and whose identity and participation can be ascertained and that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And that when you balance the mitigation evidence presented against the facts and circumstances of the offense, it's appropriate to pursue the death penalty.
The death penalty laws actually go back to 18th century BC as part of the Code of King Hammurabi of Babylon. And there were many offenses at that time that were considered capital offenses. As far as why it has been so embedded in the United States, I guess we can look to Britain for that, because Britain had a very expansive death penalty. As a matter of fact, I think it was as many as 222 crimes at one point in the 1700s were considered capital offenses. And so when British came to the United States and created the colonies here, they brought with them a practice of capital punishment. And so when the colonies were developed, created, death penalty became part of the criminal laws of the colonies. And it just continued once we became independent and states started to come into creation with their own laws, and most of them at that point then had the death penalty.
Not every homicide is a first-degree murder. Not every first-degree murder is a death penalty case. And in reviewing those types of cases, what we have to look at in the first instance is, do we have evidence that leads us to believe as prosecutors that a jury is going to agree with us unanimously 12-0 that we have proven someone's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Close questions of guilt, we do not file the death penalty in.
Statistics have shown that someone is more likely to be sentenced to death and put to death if they are black and it's a black perpetuating a capital crime against a white person. And until that inequity is resolved, the death penalty is unfair. The way it's applied across the board is unfair.
In fact, the people who end up on death row are typically the most downtrodden, mentally ill, unfortunate people in our society. Typically, I mean, they're all poor. Rich people don't end up on death row. Generally, white people don't end up on death row, at least not nearly at the rate of minorities, ethnic minorities, and it also depends a great deal on who you kill. If you kill a white person, you're much more likely to be prosecuted capitally than if you kill a black person. It's not the worst of the worst. It's typically the minorities, the ones with the worst lawyers, and it also has a lot to do with just where you happen to commit the crime. Most death penalties now come from 10 counties in the United States, one of which is Maricopa County here in Arizona.
People who make that argument have to make it nationally. They can't make it for Arizona. On our death row, 58% of those who are facing the death penalty are Caucasian. About 24% are Hispanic, and about 14% are African American. So you can't say, well, I guess you could say that if we're racially motivated to impose a death penalty against Caucasians, that would be a factor, but that's ludicrous. So most of the times when you hear various arguments about the death penalty, that's looking at national numbers, and it's taking an argument about the death penalty and elevating it above what we have to consider in Arizona, and trying to confuse the circumstances by invoking what's going on in other states.
The rationale for having it at the moment, and the only one that makes any sense, is deterrence. But my observation is that it does not really serve a deterrent effect for several reasons. First of all, a great many, if not the great majority, of killings, of murders, are the result of frenzy induced in part or in whole by drugs, and I include alcohol as a drug. So people aren't thinking rationally when they commit these crimes. A great many of them are not. So there's no deterrent effect to people like that.
80% of the executions are in the South in the United States, but the South has the highest murder rate. And then you take the northeast part of the United States, where only 1% of executions occur. They have the lowest murder rate. So I think there's a question of whether it really is a deterrent.
I can tell you that in 2012, when Arizona carried out 6 executions, Each one of those executions resulted in a lockdown of the Florence facility, meaning everyone who was in prison there, regardless of whether they were there for a homicide, was aware that the death penalty was being carried out. And I dare say that at least for that particular population, there's a deterrent effect.
Is it cruel and unusual punishment? And does it violate the 14th Amendment due process requirement, given all of the problems of determining who should live and who should die, all of the problems with inequality, with lack of uniform standards, all of the problems I mentioned. So I think that this issue will continue to come to the U.S. Supreme Court, and what they will do, I don't know.